I'm Mike, Morrison's Outdoor Adventures. Thank you guys for coming out. Uh, First off, so we are going to be covering navigation. This is a two-part class. So this first part, we're going to learn about the options that are out there, kind of the pros and cons of the different options that are out there. And we have a gentleman by the name of Jake White from Cartotracks that's going to join us right about 8 o'clock. And he is a cartographer. He runs Cartotracks. He makes maps. So he's talk a lot about kind of the difference between these different options, and he's going to tell us about the data that they provide and how well we can trust that data. So that's kind of the outline for this class. The next one is where we're going to get into kind of how do we use these to kind of map our routes, right? So I'll kind of go through the process that we as Morrison's Outdoor Adventures goes through using different products to kind of lay out our trail rides. And then Jake's going to come back again, and hopefully he'll be here in person, but he is going to teach us about reading like Latin lawn lines, topographical maps, contour lines, things like that. Just kind of a brief introduction to kind of identify types of terrain just off of like a paper map or some of the maps that are provided on these. So that's the outline for the two classes. Let's go ahead and get started. So let's talk about the different options that are out there and kind of the main groups that we have. So mobile phones, right? Mobile phones have excellent GPSs. They've come a long way. Typically, you can get accurate to within about 12 meters or 12 feet, somewhere in that range, with your mobile phone. So that's pretty close, right? Depending on the overhead coverage that you have or access to the satellites. The big kind of ones out there right now, Gaia. They were kind of the first one. It's spelled Gaia, Gaia Maps, but they were kind of the first one to hit the market as far as outright, I kind of call them off-road style navigation options. They also cover hiking, camping, hunting, all different options. They also, as far as options within that app itself, they have the most options of any other one on the market now because they've been out for so long. They have roughly about 250 different maps that you can access if you are signed up on their premium version, right? So they are subscription. So what I mean by that is basically you pay a yearly fee. You can sign up for up to 5 years and save some money. But the thing about it is it's a lot of maps. It's not very user friendly from time to time. It can be hard to figure out some of it, especially on your phone. But one of the good things in Gaia kind of set the standard for this is you can sit at your home on your laptop or your computer and you can plan out your route and it will automatically sync to your phone through your account or your tablet that you have in your vehicle as long as it has data connectivity for it to sync. Once it syncs, you have that on your phone, basically. The other good thing about Gaia, and again, this is something that they kind of set the standard for, is if you're going to a location, like let's say I'm going into Pisgah National Forest or I'm going into Uwharrie National Forest, I can specifically select that section through Gaia and download that portion so that once I'm there, I no longer need internet connectivity to look at that map. It is now on my phone. And it's pretty easy to do. And it downloads relatively quickly, even over cell phone data. So you can do that with your cell phone. And the other cool thing about Gaia is typically when you do this, you just have to pick a big square. But with Gaia, you can actually get, all different shapes and sizes. So you're not downloading a lot of stuff that you don't need. The downside with Gaia, as far as that's concerned, is you have to do it on all the different map layers that you're using within Gaia. So, for instance, if on Gaia I'm using what we call a motor vehicle use map, which is a national forest map. If we're using a motor vehicle use map, I have to download that one. But if I'm also using, say, National Geographic map, then I have to download that map as well. So I have to download each one of those individually and be able to switch between them on the trail. So that can be a little bit cumbersome. The next option out there is OnX. So OnX is probably one of the newest ones. They've been around for a little while, but they have kind of burst onto the scene pretty hard, and done a lot of really good work in some areas to improve on some of the older ones that are out there like Gaia. OnX, again, it's app based on your mobile phone. Okay, so you do have to have internet connectivity in order to download the maps or to have the maps on your phone. Once you have them on your phone, very similar to Gaia, they are on there indefinitely. So you can have offline maps, basically, where you no longer need that internet connectivity to use them. But the really cool thing about OnX is you don't have a lot of those maps that you'll never use, right? Where Gaia is supplying you with 250 maps, OnX only supplies you with a certain number of what they call base map layers. And then they highlight the trail in a specific area around you. So you can see those trails. For instance, here, one of our local trails, Hurricane Creek, it highlights it right up there. It says Hurricane Creek on there. And that is, I can click on it. It brings up all the information for it. When it's open, when it's closed, what is accessible there, whether it's got to be a street legal vehicle, they call overland vehicles, basically is their term for street legal vehicles, side-by-sides, ATVs, or hiking. So that's really a huge benefit to OnX, right? Because now we know when we are on an area that is designated for our type of recreation. So we don't end up, on a hiking trail on our dirt bike, right? Or on a mountain bike trail or an ATV trail in our overland vehicle, our Jeep or our Tacoma, or our Land Cruiser. So they also, and this is a huge shout out to OnX, they are setting it so that their trails have two different types of ratings. One is a difficulty rating, and it's on, I believe it's on a 1 to 5 scale. And then they have a technical rating, which is on a 1 to 10 scale. Okay. And the good thing about this is across the United States, it doesn't matter if it's one national forest versus the next national forest, they don't have a universal rating system. For instance, you are a national forest, they use a 1 through 10 scale, right? Now, if you go like to Brown Mountain, they use a 1 through 5 scale. And if you go to some of the others, they're just going to tell you, hey, you need this equipment to be on this trail. So OnX is providing kind of a universal language, so to speak, for how they're grading trails, which is pretty exceptional, kind of in that realm. So that's really good if you're concerned about, hey, am I going to end up, and you call the Forest Service and say, hey, you are, what's the rating of such and such trail? Oh, that's a 5, and their rating scale is only 1 to 5, and you end up on the most difficult trail there. You call the next one, they're like, oh, that's a 5, and you don't do it, but it's only a mid-range trail, right? So that's a huge benefit. The other thing that they do for a lot of their routes is they will tell you what type of terrain you're going to be driving on. If it's just an unimproved gravel road, it will tell you gravel, right? That's the type of surface it is. If it's a section of road that's paved, it will tell you paved. If it's just a trail, it's just going to tell you dirt, right? So that's some of the huge benefits to OnX. And from a visual standpoint, I'll try to show everybody this when we start pulling out some of these to demonstrate. But from a visual standpoint too, this time of year we have a lot of trails that are closed in the wintertime. So when I pull up the map in my area, it's going to have a green trail, which is like, hey, this is a Forest Service road. It's going to be highlighted in green, stands out very well, very visual. The next one may be blue. That means it's a feature trail, meaning it's very, very popular, right? It's a very popular area. And then it may have one that's highlighted in red, which means at this point in time, this trail is closed. We cannot access it until which time the date changes to when it opens, and then that trail will be highlighted green or blue. So that's another huge benefit to OnX. Now it is, again, the same thing. It is subscription based. The very limited time I've spent most of my time with Gaia, just because now I'm used to it. So I don't like to step out of my comfort zone. I started playing with OnX. In my very limited use of it, what I've noticed is that it's very easy to plan a route. Where Gaia, if I look at routes around here that are available, I have to start looking how to tie all these different routes together with gravel, pavement. Here's a paved road, or I got to jump on the interstate and jump off here. Whereas Onyx, they almost take a lot of that out of the equation. Some of them will even show you um, the routes to tie them together, okay, so to speak. So you may have to jump on the interstate for this portion or jump on this highway or backcountry road for this portion to tie these two roads together. So Onyx does a really good job of doing that. I think Onyx is roughly about $30 a year for their subscription based. They do an exceptional job also of updating their map layers. Earlier I mentioned motor vehicle use map. You're going to see it as like an MVUM map. So that map, basically the Forest Service, anytime they change a road in a location, let's say Pisgah suddenly shuts this road down, they have to now release a new motor vehicle use map to show that road as being closed. Onyx updates theirs as soon as they get this information, right? As soon as they can receive this information, they get it and update it. Whereas Gaia, sometimes their motor vehicle use maps can be as far out as 10 years, some of the ones that I've used. So you have to be very, very careful. With both of them, you have to be careful, but exceptionally careful with Gaia, I have found, in that you may be on a route that is not legal anymore, right? Yes, ma'am.
Is there a place where you can see how old it is?
A lot of times it will tell you in the map data when you open the information in Gaia.
Right.
Or when you pick that layer, if you read little fine print right below that layer, it will say the year that it was good for.
I've never seen that.
So, and again, now it does change somewhat. So if you're using iPhone versus Android, there is some difference in the layouts. What I typically will do with maps like that, where I'm unsure, motor vehicle use maps are free, right? You can download them off of the National Forest website. So you can download it and double check to make sure that that route you're on. But again, that's another step, right? We're looking to make it as easy as we can. So that's another point where Onyx kind of stands out. Now this next one here, I'm not going to talk about it too much because it's not one we use a whole lot, but it's lead nav, right? Lead nav is very big in the off-road racer world, okay? It has some uses, very rarely on the East Coast, kind of in our route planning and stuff like that. The satellite imagery from lead nav is probably the best out of all of them. And again, that's because it kind of gets its history from the race world. So it works really well out west where they don't have a lot of tree coverage. But here on the East Coast, it is very limited because it can lay out a route, but satellite imagery is not going to help you if you have to look through the canopy of a bunch of big oak trees. So that's kind of lead nav. That's kind of just it in a nutshell, mostly for the race world. But Google Maps, right? Google Maps, especially when you are dealing with national forest property or state parks, Google Maps, they do have most of those routes on there. And you can, with Google Maps, use this offline if you download that map portion. So it's very similar, to be able to download with Gaia and Onyx. It's free, right? It's also a very good way to kind of cross-reference the information that you're getting from Gaia and Onyx, okay? The other good thing versus Onyx and Gaia that Google offers, if you do have satellite service or if you downloaded the map, you can find the closest gas station if you're running out of gas, or closest camping area or campsite, maybe a public campsite. So that is the positives of Google Maps kind of over the other two. The downsides that I find with Google Maps is, again, you really only have two map layers. You have their main one that we all normally see, and then they have their satellite view. That's very limited. Whereas, with Gaia and Onyx, you have quite a few more that you can operate off of. So that's mobile phone options. Those are the most general that people are going to use, right? Relatively low investment. We all carry a cell phone for the most part, and typically it's a big touch screen so we can see it fairly easily. So, the downside that I find to the kind of the mobile phone aspect of it is I'm also trying to use this for just about everything else that I do. I also have a really hard time with a lot of the mounting options for these because on the road, we're driving down the pavement. This is nice and stable, and I can see my directions on it, no problem. But once I get off road, even the heavy duty Ram mounts, this is still bouncing all over the place. The screen is still relatively small, so it's set up somewhere on your windshield or somewhere down low, and you're trying to make adjustments too, which can be relatively hard. But we all stop driving, right, when we have to make adjustments on our phone, of course. So also, when we're downloading a lot of maps to these, it can get cluttered. And the next thing you know, you've cleared out some of the memory on your phone because most of the memory now on phones is set, right? It's the same whether it's, say 60 gigabytes. Well, we fill it up with 60 gigabytes of pictures and we erase a lot of stuff on our phones. We accidentally erase our map and now we don't have it the next time we go out on the trail. But the benefits is I can sync this between my computer, my tablet, and everything else, right? With like Gaia and OnX, even Google Maps, we can sync it. So that is a positive, but the number one downside for me is just mounting. I can't stand when I'm off road and having my phone bounce around and jounce around, and the really good mounts that hold it, I can't get it out of. So I get a phone call and I'm trying to pull it out of the mount, and it just doesn't work a whole lot for me. But I still use, again, Gaia, and I'm starting to use OnX in my route planning. All right, so mobile units, right? Dedicated GPS units. Now, there's a ton of options out there, right? Magellan, Garmin, and some of the companies have merged, but like DeLorme and some of those that have been making units for a long time. The two big ones for in-vehicle mounting is the Magellan TRX and the Garmin Overland. Okay, now I'm going to show you guys a little bit of the Magellan TRX, but I don't have a lot of experience with it yet. Then I'm going to show you the Garmin Overlander, which I've been using now for a couple months to get familiar with it. But the Magellan TRX was kind of the first one, right? It beat the Garmin to the market. It does a good job of being a good, robust system in your vehicle. It is built off an Android phone platform. So if you're familiar with Android phones, you're going to find that you're going to be able to use this relatively. It's like a big tablet, basically, but it's a little bit more rugged. So with this and the software that they use, the really cool thing about it is using Magellan's TRX software on this, you can also do the same thing on your computer and route plan, and you can sync it between both of them.
Cynthia just held one up online. She's got one apparently.
Yeah.
You guys can't see. If you unmute Cynthia, we can show it. She's got two of them.
Awesome. So being able to sync, again, between your desktop, so while you're at home, you can route plan and look up different things when you have good internet connectivity, then you can sync all that with your TRX. The other really good thing about the TRX is you do get lifetime map updates, and that is very important for these standalone units, right? Where, we talked about the updates with Gaia being a little further out and OnX, where these are app-based, their updates are obviously free, right? But when you start getting into standalone GPS units and a map changes, now in the past you used to have to buy the updated map software, and it was expensive, right? And we all know how much roads change and trails change. So for that updated software, this is free. It's lifetime, right, through their TRX program. I haven't messed with that a whole lot on this platform, but we'll talk about the Garmin Overlander that kind of does the same thing. The other thing that Magellan does, and this is where I think these really shine and make it nice, is they supply a powered RAM mount, right? So when I clip this in on my vehicle, I can plug this in, but this clips right in the back here. I say it does. There we go. And it is powered, right? It's charging constantly. With the RAM mount, I can connect it to a windshield. If I have other RAM mounts mounted in my vehicle, I can do that. Now I've got a much bigger screen that's a lot easier for me to see the data on it when I am off-road. Uh, and again, so the benefit of having the bigger screen and the mount, it's not shaking around, bouncing all over the place as well. I also don't have to worry about killing my battery all day long. Okay, and because it's just a nice clean, I can take it and unclip it right off of this, pull it down, work with it, and then it will clip right back in. Okay, so that's the Magellan TRX.
Does it still bounce all over the place?
Not as bad. No, not as bad as a phone.
I
Even
thought-
though it's heavier, it seems to hold a little bit better. This particular one here, this is the Garmin Overlander. This is probably one of the newest standalone GPS units kind of to the market now. And this is the one that I played the most with. Just like your Magellan TRX, you can sync this between your computer and you can sync it between your tablet. This connects to Wi-Fi just like a tablet would. It also works off of Android operating system. The other thing is basically the navigation app that is tied into this, the Garmin Explore, you can download directly to your phone. So now you can sync between all 3 or 4 devices if you had another tablet. So it's kind of just a little step up from the Magellan TRX, right? I wouldn't say it's a huge difference, and probably Magellan by now has a way to sync it with your phone also, but that's a huge benefit, right? If for some reason this dies while I'm out on the trail, I can pull it right up on my phone and continue my route, and I don't have to worry about it. The other kind of good thing about getting into this one is now we can start to tie in some of the safety things that we can do with GPSs also. So Garmin has an inReach, which is basically a portable safety beacon that can be set up to send and receive text messages if someone needs to find you, or if you are stuck, you can press the SOS button and people come. You can tie it right into this from that, and you can send and receive text messages from this unit using that device as kind of an antenna, just like a cell phone, but it uses satellites. You can also make and receive basically satellite phone calls if you have the correct plan to go along with that. So that's where these kind of take a step up from most of the other options on the market, especially in kind of that safety aspect, or just letting people know where you are kind of on your route. So I make my father carry one of the Garmin inReaches, and we set it up so that it would send me a text every 2 hours, basically, with his coordinates and a message of, hey, I'm okay, right? So if I didn't receive that, then I would know that he was not okay, and we could find him, basically, because it pinpoints where he's at with GPS. So again, like we talked about with the syncing data, here's where these standalone units kind of tend to struggle is unless I'm at a coffee shop or somewhere that's offering me Wi-Fi, these standalone units can't update, right? So if I go right now, I've got North Carolina basically downloaded on this, their maps downloaded on this. If I go to Tennessee, I've got to somehow connect this to Wi-Fi in order to download the Tennessee maps, or the Utah maps, or the Colorado maps. So that's a huge struggle with these, where a lot of times these are on our cell phone, so we have that data to do that. Now, what I do with the Garmin Overlander is I set my phone up as a hotspot, right? So it's sending out when I have good signal, and I do my work on this, and I go back off the hotspot once I've got the map downloaded that I need, or if I have to sync data. So that's what I do. Not everybody has that option, right? Or you may not have signal. So keep that in mind, that again, planning ahead with these standalone units is super important, right? Because if you get out of an area and you don't have access to any type of cell signal to create a Wi-Fi hotspot, they're basically, for the most part, done. Okay. One other thing that I will tie in with this one, and again, I haven't used the TRX enough to say, but with this particular unit, it's very similar to Google Maps. This would be kind of the closest replacement to Google Maps for an overall map service. I can also use this for point-to-point navigation. If I create a vehicle profile on the Garmin Overlander, for instance, if we're moving in our camper, right? We're moving our big truck in our camper. If I set our vehicle profile up of the length, the height, the width, it will plan that route accordingly. I can also choose campsites based on that. So if we're, it is very nice. So you can also say, okay, hey, I'm in a two-door Wrangler, and it will find a campsite that you will fit in. Then you can say, hey, I'm in my four-door Tacoma with a small trailer. It will find a campsite. As long as it's in the database, okay? And works offline as long as you've downloaded that map segment, okay? So that's a huge benefit. It is, I find that the Garmin Overlander over these, and this, it also works off your voice, but but over these, I find this to be much more intuitive to use, right? Much easier to use. It's a whole lot easier to see my route on if I have planned a route. And because it's very similar to OnX and you only have about 5 map layers, you have OpenStreet, which is basically like Google Maps. You also have a couple of satellite images, and then you have some topographical maps. It's not a lot of stuff that I don't need. The downside to it is it's not going to have as much information as like Gaia and OnX, right? At first, okay? Because a lot of this information that we're finding on these is free or relatively cheap information to find, but these companies have to acquire this information. So what these guys have done is basically find a lot of this information, upload it, or they get it from these companies in data form, pay for it, and they give it out. So the Garmin Overlander and the Magellan TRX, they're not going to have that. So if I'm looking for like a motor vehicle use map or say like a National Geographic Trails map, they're not going to have that. But what you can do, once you kind of get familiar with it, you can even do it right from your phone. Again, talking about how it syncs is, again, so I use motor vehicle use maps a lot. You can go online and download a motor vehicle use map in what they call a GPX format and upload it to the app and then download it directly to this. And I believe you can do that with the Magellan TRX also. Now I have basically all those routes highlighted. So if I go to explore, you can see these routes will be highlighted with like a highlighted black line, or you can even change that in the settings if you guys can kind of see that on there. But you have to go through that process to do it. It's not going to give it to you. So again, you're going to have to do a little bit of work with this. That's probably true for any one of these, okay, that you find right here, okay? Mobile phone units with apps or mobile units. People ask me all the time, what's the best one? There is no perfect world answer, right? Because Gaia provides you with a ton of information, but sometimes it can be very outdated. OnX has some really great stuff on there, but they may not have everything that you need, right? Because they're a relatively newer company, and a lot of their information that or data that they're receiving is coming from government agencies, right? And we all know they work so fast. So OnX may not have the area that you're looking for or the route you're looking for. There may be a beautiful route that's not even listed on here, okay? Lead nav, we talked briefly about that, but the overhead view is really kind of the killer. The Magellan TRX and the Garmin Overlander, I would say if I was going to choose one off the shelf right away, I would probably choose one or the other of these because they're probably the most intuitive, but they don't have the information that you're going to find with the others because you're not going to have all those map layers, right? But as long as I can get my hands on a GPX file, basically a route, someone shares a route with you, then I can upload it to these guys, right? And if you don't have navigation in your car, they kind of help out with that as well. The only perfect solution out there is paper maps, right? Paper maps, yeah, we see some clapping, but paper maps have gone away, right? A lot, a lot. Not many people carry paper maps. What's that?
There's still paper maps as like zoo stuff.
Disney World has paper
Yeah,
maps.
Disney World still uses paper maps, but they probably have an app too, right?
Probably.
But paper
Yes,
maps are the best solution, right? They're going to be the most up to date, mostly, right? They're not going to leave it on the shelf if it's very out of date. It's typically going to have the most information on it. Regardless of whatever you're using off this list, it's not going to have the same amount of information that a paper map is going to be able to provide with you. Downside to the paper map world, and really the only downside with those, excuse me, is the fact that a lot of times paper maps can get destroyed, right? But there's basically two paper maps that I get my hands on. The first one is the National Geographic Trails map. If you have ever gone into any gas station, REI, or any type of outdoor store, especially when you get out west, you're going to see these little yellow brochures folded up, and it's going to say National Geographic Trails map on it. Those are the most comprehensive maps basically out there that I've found, as far as what we're doing, because they are basically a complete map of all the trails in a specific area of hiking, mountain biking, off-roading, you name it, they probably put that trail on there, if you can think about that specific user group. With how those maps work, right? So when you're looking for a National Geographic map for an area, this is where kind of the struggle comes in. They don't do like a whole state. They have to do very small areas because there's so much information on these maps. So for instance, if I go out to Utah, I have a lot of the Utah maps, but if I go out there and I'm looking for a map and I go into an REI, they're going to have like 6 Utah maps. They're going to have one specifically for Arches National Park. They're going to have another one for just the Moab trails. They're going to have another for, Canyonlands, right? Or it may be even broken up by like northeast or northwest Utah and so forth. And it's excuse me, it's going to be correlated with a number, and you have to find that specific map and grab it, right? That's really the only downside to them. But the really cool thing about the National Geographic paper maps, and they're not really paper, is their durability versus a lot of the other maps on the market. They're actually a waterproof foldable map. You could pretty much, for the most part, dip it right in water and pull it right back out. And I'm not going to say it's going to be perfect, but it's not going to fall apart in your hands like a normal paper map would. The other really good thing with that particular map is they have a really comprehensive legend, okay, on the map. While Gaia, their premium subscription, gets you all of the National Geographic maps, all of them across the United States, you don't have access to the legend, right? You have to go to their website and find where the legend is. So if you're looking at, this little dotted trail and you're like, is that for off-road vehicles? Well, now you got to remember where that came from. What I did was I screenshot, that map legend. So I keep it on my phone. But that's kind of the struggle with the digital copies of the Nat Geo trail maps. Okay. So this is probably one of the #1 maps that I use. And we'll actually break some out in the next class so that we can see them. And you guys can kind of look through them and we'll talk about the features on them. The next map that I use is a topographical map, basically a map with contour lines that shows me elevation. A lot of times, if you are on BLM land, basically any type of public lands, there's going to be a free topographical map available online, or the same place that you're buying your Nat Geo Trails maps, like REI, they're going to have the Forest Service or BLM topographical maps available. Same thing applies on the bigger tracts of land out west, is you're going to have to correlate that number with a specific area. It's not going to be an entire state. But the topographical map is a big one that I carry. Motor vehicle use map that I've talked about is basically a topographical map with routes overlaid onto it. So in kind of that aspect, that's where I start looking for terrain features. And that's what we're going to learn about in the next class is looking at terrain features and learning how to identify. So even though, I primarily use Gaia and the Garmin Overlander now, I still always revert back to paper maps. The final kind of, hey, this is the final piece of the puzzle to identify what's in that area. And I always, if I'm going to a specific area, carry a paper map of that area. Even if it's like your DeLorme Atlas, right? At least in that realm, you can find a paved road. So, while it may not have all the unpaved routes on it, it'll certainly get you close to getting out of danger if you're in trouble. So how are we doing on time for Jake?
Jake is online.
He's online?
Yes.
All right. So before I kind of continue with any more of this, does anybody have any questions? Do we have any questions online, Al?
No.
Nope. Awesome. Any questions from you guys?
Do you see folks with a, somewhere in between the dedicated unit and a phone, like a mini iPad that's dedicated to mapping? Because I don't like to have my phone tied up because it's my phone, it's my music, it's all kinds of things.
I do, and I did that for a long time. Basically, I ran Gaia on a tablet, but what I found was the same thing as my phone. I couldn't find a good mount for the tablet that held it really sturdy for me. I was always having to fight with cords running to it to keep it charged, and really, basically, at that point in time, it was just an extension of my phone. But I did run that for a long time, up until recently using the Garmin Overlander. And cost-wise, buying a tablet and paying the subscription for the Garmin with going with the Magellan Gaia with going with the Magellan or the Garmin Overlander, you've probably already paid for one of those already. That's kind of the struggle with it, and where I struggle a whole lot with kind of the subscription services is I can invest kind of a one-time fee into these, whereas these, and it's not cheap. $30 a year is not exceptionally cheap, and Gaia I think is even more expensive than that.
45 or
Yeah,
70.
yeah. Unless you sign up for like 5 years at a time, I don't know where I'm going to be in 5 years, right? I may not. I may be like I'm in a cubicle. Not really. That would never happen. But after so many years, you pay for a standalone unit, right? And I haven't found like a perfect solution. So that's why I kind of like being able to have both of them.
Mm-hmm.
Question, like you mentioned before that on Garmin you need to download each state, right? Can you just download the whole US map?
The question is on the Garmin Overlander of talking about downloading each state, whether you can just download the entire country. So you can, but you're talking tons and tons of data, right? Or memory, right?
Or can I like at least, let's say, get right away 15 states?
You probably could fit that. So let me back up. Again, one of the benefits of both of these units compared to our phones is they have expandable memory, right? So I can get an SD card and I could download and have each state on an SD card, just swap them out as I needed them, right? So I go from North Carolina to Tennessee, I grab my Tennessee SD card and I pop it in, and now it's ready to go. Where I can't necessarily do that with my phone very easily, these do have expandable memory to be able to hold more and more area or more maps on them or tracks and routes.
How much usually of a memory does it take one state, roughly? Like states differ.
It's very different. It just depends on how much data they have in that specific area. Here on the East Coast, most of the maps are going to be relatively low memory because we don't have what they have as far as those type of routes out west. Now you go to like Utah or Colorado, Arizona, those areas, those maps are going to be a lot bigger. And it also varies based on the size, especially for the Garmin, because those maps also include all the on-road stuff as well. So they can get fairly extensive. This one, the Garmin Overlander typically will not let you download a map bigger than a state at a time. So it's kind of a little bit of a struggle. But the cool thing this one does, and I don't know if the Magellan does, is if I'm in a specific area, like let's say I go to Pennsylvania. When I pull into Pennsylvania, maybe I'm at McDonald's grabbing a bite to eat. I can connect to Wi-Fi, and it'll immediately tell me the that I need to update my maps, and I just push a button and it downloads right
So
to
it
it.
kind of warns you, right?
It does.
Changes the state line, like
Yeah.
with the map.
Sometimes even not state lines. It may even be, if you haven't downloaded the maps for a town, right? When you get close to that area, you pull up the update software on this, and it automatically tells you the maps that you should update. So that is a huge benefit to this as well. Really, the biggest limitations with these is kind of the amount of data that you're given versus like Gaia on X and Google Maps. That's kind of the hard part of that about that. Anything else? All right. So we've kind of learned about these. What Jake is going to do, he's going to kind of tell us a little bit about how our GPSs work and why some things are more important than others, as well as he's going to go into a little bit more depth on some of these because he's got more knowledge, and he's going to talk about a couple other options that are out there that I'm not very knowledgeable about, like Avenza maps, which he uses quite a bit. But he also is, again, he's a dedicated cartographer. His company, Cartotracks, they go out and make maps. If you've ever been to Uwharrie National Forest, he mapped all of Uwharrie National Forest, not just the off-road trails, but all the mountain bike, horseback, hiking trails, and everything. And you can, in turn, purchase these maps from Cartotracks and upload them to like Avenza. And they work offline. But they are super detailed. One of the things that you're going to hear Jake talk about, and I'm going to let him go more in depth of this, is the difference between basically user submitted data and data from like a cartographer like Jake. Because there is a big difference, and pretty much I would probably say probably 50 to 70% of these options outside of paper maps has a lot of user submitted data on them. So that's kind of where a struggle lays. But we'll bring Jake on.
Great. And well, I'm videoing in from Madison, Alabama. That's where I'm sitting tonight. So hello, all you in Asheville area and others at home. Mike, thanks for the introduction. I've got a little bit of background in cartography as he has described, and that's my thing. My wife and I both own this business, Cartotracks, and we have both of us have degrees in geography. That was our focus in college, and this business kind of just fell in our lap, really, in the off-road space. And in the process, over the course of the last 7 or 8 years now, we've been doing this. We've learned quite a bit about our competition and other options that are available out there. And I don't mind speaking about all those other options. There's a lot of value in kind of diversifying your options for off-road navigation. There's no magic bullet right now that does everything. So I want y'all to be open-minded about having a multitude of options in front of you that you can toggle through and choose from as you go, because there really isn't a magic bullet in the mapping world in off-road navigation. So there are some really good solutions, and but those don't cover everything. It's all about a matter of kind of breaking it down into where you're going as part of it. It's a geographic thing. It's also some limitations in the technology and the hardware that you've got, and deciding which one works best for you and where you want to go. So Mike, I don't know how much you've done so far to talk about Tread Lightly and Southern. We don't need to go into a whole lot of detail about that, but it is awfully important to try and have good map data and be prepared in your travels. That's a big part of treading lightly, is knowing where you're going and going in the right places where you're supposed to go. So I like to put that logo up there to start this off, and we've got a lot of support from Southern Four-Wheel Drive Association and promoting those ethical tread lightly behaviors. So thanks to both for their support. So go ahead to the next screen, Mike or Al. And as I came in and came into this call and heard Mike finishing up there, he's probably already touched on some of this stuff. So I'll kind of go briefly through some of these options. These are the old school options of that thing called print, which is still a very useful option for folks. It's something that really doesn't fail you unless you let it blow out the window. You've got a paper map, and there's really no batteries to charge other than maybe a headlamp at night to be able to read it. But so the main options that we still value, I think, a lot these days in the print map option world is the U.S. Geologic Survey. Those are the topo maps, and in our next class session in 2 weeks, we'll do some hands-on. I'm going to do a little bit of show and tell and bring some old school paper maps, and we can look at some of those together. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the symbology and the features in a topographic map made by the U.S. Geologic Survey. There's a lot of things that folks just don't know what those things are, what those features are, and what they represent. How to understand and measure distances on topo maps, and understand how to read topography and contours and all those kinds of things. We'll talk about a lot of that stuff in that next class, but that's a great option, and they're out there and they're available. They're also available in the digital form that you can download those same maps just in a digital format in the Venza app that we'll talk about in a little bit. Delorme is a good one. They make these great print map books. I'll bring some of those for show and tell as well when we do that next session. But they're really handy. I love those. They're really impressive what they show in the backwoods, back roads that are legally accessible, but things that you don't see on a state highway map or even in Google Maps sometimes. So they're handy. Forest Service is also an option that they produce their own maps of the land that they're tasked with managing, as well as the Bureau of Land Management. That's something that East Coast folks don't really know much about, because BLM is not very prominent in the eastern United States. Most of the land that they manage is out west. So that's another one. Both of them make maps. They do just the bare bones basic job of making a very basic map. They're not real amazing maps from a cartographic standpoint. They're just real basic things. And some of them are hard to read because you got Forest Service names for roads and trails that are just an FS for Forest Service and then a 4 or 5 digit number after that. So who knows what it is, but the locals may call that a certain trail name that's got a local name. So some of those leave a bit to be desired if you're trying to find your way through places and find a specific trail. If you know the local name, but you don't know the Forest Service number, the maps are kind of hard to navigate with. But local maps, private entities making maps are still around. We're a company that does that. There's a lot of other people that are still making maps out there, and you can pick those up in local gas stations and visitor centers as you come into an area. A lot of times you can pick up those federal government maps as well in those same places, like a visitor center. So those are handy. And then print guidebooks. There's a company, I can't think of the name right now, but out west in around Utah, there's a guy named Mark Wells that's produced these map books and guidebooks that give you really in-depth detail of Moab trails. It'll walk you through how to drive the trail sometimes. They're very extensive descriptions describing those trails, and there's some pretty good maps in them as well. All right, so this is kind of a fun little history lesson that shocks a lot of people, I think, when I talk about this. I think it's kind of cool, but a thing just lost in history. Not many people knew about this, but back in 1981, Honda had this thing called electrogyrocator, which was basically your first map-based automotive navigation system. There's a picture of it there that kind of shows what that looked like. It was an option in 2 cars. You see that down at the bottom bullet point, 1981 Accord and a Viger, I guess is how you pronounce it. But it used cathode ray tubes and these little map sheets that you would put into that little screen, and it would basically figure out your mileage and using a gyroscope and then the mileage in the car, like the odometer, and kind of plot your course across the little card. And when you turn, the gyroscope would detect that turn and how many degrees you're turning, and then it would send your little marker going off in a new direction every time you turn. So it's really rudimentary, but kind of funny that actually existed. That was really kind of the first ever in-dash navigation system ever built. We kind of laugh at it now, considering what we're about to talk about and all the technology that we have in our phones. But pretty funny. So fun to share. I'll go ahead to the next slide. I think we got one more about it. We'll go through that cost, I guess. That's what it cost then, was about $2,700 was the upgrade and that feature in those cars. So that's equivalent to about $7,000 today, which is quite the upgrade if you were to add that in. So a lot of money then and now, really. So anyway, well, let's go on to these. I think Mike has probably also talked about these a little bit as handheld standalone GPS units. They have their value and they have their place. They're not for everybody, but they're an option. The Garmin Magellans of the day, the old school handheld that you see in the top center picture there, is kind of the first real kind of civilian use handheld GPS unit style, where you could take it out in the woods and go hiking and carry it with you. And they had base maps that you could load in them. And those have advanced some these days, but not really great for vehicle navigation when you're in a vehicle trying to follow roads and tracks. It leaves a lot to be desired just because of the display. It's awful small, smaller than most smartphones now, even. So really probably best for backpacking and that kind of thing. Then below it is a Garmin Overlander. I know Mike's got a lot more hands-on experience with one of those, and I heard him talking about it, so I don't need to go into a whole lot of detail about that. But it is a standalone unit. Doesn't really do a whole lot more than navigation. It might have a camera in it, but there's not a whole lot more that you could do with it. And Magellan also makes a unit that's very comparable to the Garmin Overlander. They compete with one another in that space, and it's called the TRX. Both of them are pretty much standalone units, but they do have a bigger screen and kind of has a tablet feel. So they have their place, and for the big screen, that's definitely a value for that. And what you can bring into it is useful. Lowrance is something that's very little used in the eastern United States, but it's really common out west with desert racers. Around here, we think of Lowrance as a fish finder, and you see them on bass boats, and that company makes fish finders. And so essentially what people use is the fish finder for GPS. And so it'll load in data. It's a weird proprietary file type called a USR file. So it's kind of weird and it's hard to work with it. But desert people out west and off-road racers use that quite a bit. They've now got color screens, and a lot of the racing requirements require that they wear fire retardant suits and race suits, and their gloves have to be fire retardant. So touch screens don't work with those fire retardant gloves. So they have buttons on the Lowrance unit that it's handy for fishing and that kind of thing. And so that's another reason why they like them. The gloves, they can keep their gloves on and they can manipulate the screen with the touch buttons on the side. So a little bit of value there. And then the last one is Insane Audio. That's a company you can look up. They make in-dash units for Jeeps at least. I'm not sure if they do any other brands, but the Wrangler JKs and JLs. This is a head unit that is really a radio head unit, but it also has a screen and it has access to the Google Play store. So you have Android-based apps that you can download into an in-dash unit, which is pretty handy. So any of the apps that we're going to discuss in a little bit in the Google store can be downloaded into that app. You'd need to connect to Wi-Fi like at your house or something and get all that stuff downloaded ahead of time. But pretty handy, and it's also a radio, and it does a bunch of other stuff too. So they're a bit expensive if you look at just the number, but if you look at what all they can do, it's probably pretty fair for what it does. So those are pretty handy. And then on the right over there is just a screenshot of an Avenza screenshot of a U.S. Geologic Survey topo map that you can download in Avenza. But that's what it would look like in a mobile device. So you can get as big as a mobile screen as you can and download it in there. You can go full screen with that. And they're pretty handy. And those are free, by the way. So Avenza maps, just the base level, app download is free, and then all the maps from the U.S. Geologic Survey are free. Our tax dollars have already paid for that, so you can go and download those at no additional charge until you run out of space on the device, pretty much. So, go ahead, Al. Next slide, please. So we'll jump off into the iOS, Android options, what we call smartphones today. They're really not that old. It's a first launch of the iPhone was 2007. So in the whole scheme of things in the history of mapping and navigation since Lewis and Clark headed west, we've come a long way for mapping this country and others. And now being able to carry it all in your pocket is pretty impressive. So there's a lot of value in this with iPhones and Android devices. And the main value is that it's a device that you already have. It's hardware you've already got. And there's a lot of options that you can use to download into that device and not buy an additional piece of hardware. So there's quite a bit of value to that. The biggest drawback is just screen size. And when you're driving and navigating off-road, having a bigger screen is a lot easier, having a bigger target to look at. But those work in iOS, iPads, even iPad minis. I've got one that's a mini that I'll hold up here. That's a pretty decent size screen. Here's a iPhone, one of the more recent iPhones. So you can kind of get an idea of the screen size, but this is really handy for dedicated use for navigating with, and you can mount these to the dash and that kind of thing. And likewise, Android tablets are just the same. It's all a matter of just picking what screen size you want to go with. The argument between iOS and Android these days is kind of becoming like Ford and Chevy. They all have their value, and some of them have drawbacks too. It's just kind of a matter of picking what's in your budget and what you're comfortable with. But I always recommend people just pick what you want to do for the screen size. That's the critical thing. And if you really want to be cheap and you don't want to worry about, if you want to consider it almost disposable, I would probably go Android route, just because the Samsung tablets are stupid cheap these days. You can get one for just a little over $100 and just have that be your dedicated navigation device. I heard a question, somebody asking Mike there in the in-person audience, I think, about, it ties up my phone if I'm using it. And that's my recommendation for folks that want to still have their phone for phone use, get out and take pictures and whatnot. Just buy a cheap tablet. Go grab a $150 or less Android tablet and use it for that and keep it dedicated to that use. And that works great. And $100 is $100, but in the whole scheme of things, compared to like an iPad of the same size, you're probably paying over $300. So it's almost disposable, really, in that scheme, and it can do a bunch of other stuff too. So that's a good option if you want to keep your phone dedicated to phone use and that kind of thing. So, all right, Al, next slide. So the satellite options these days, this has kind of gotten a little interesting, and I like to teach about this a little bit. We all talk about GPS, Global Positioning System. That's obviously, as most of y'all know, the United States government has deployed these satellites that are spinning around in low Earth orbit, and that we use those to determine our location. That's basically how that works. It triangulates your position. But what a lot of people don't know is our modern smartphones, like our iPhones and our Android phones, they also use GLONASS, which is the Russian constellation as well now. And it's pretty handy. It actually helps us a little bit because, for instance, if you're in a deep canyon, or maybe you're in a really deep tree canopy, maybe in the eastern United States, you might have a view right above you, above your vehicle, through the canopy or up through the canyon walls. And above you, you've only got 3 GPS satellites. And so you can find your location, but it's not super accurate. But in that window and in that view, you might have 2 or 3 more GLONASS satellites as well. So our phones and modern GPS devices, being able to utilize both systems really increases our accuracy now. And that's been changing over, I'd say, probably the last 5 years. So most pretty much any new iPhone or Samsung or any of the other major manufacturers, even in the Android world, are all utilizing those two. They're using GPS and GLONASS, and they're also using the cellular network. If you've got access to that and signal, it'll also use that in the equation to help refine your accuracy of your location. And then now there's another one that's coming that the United States is now deploying called GPS-3. And Al, if you'll go on to that next slide, we'll talk about that a little bit. So this is where the future is, and this is where it's coming. The very first one in this series of new satellites, GPS-3, was launched by Lockheed Martin, called Vespucci, cost $529 million, and it was launched in December 2018. There's 9 more coming. $5.5 billion is a lot of money. So currently our phones, we're at best doing somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 10 meter accuracy on your location. With GPS-3, once this whole network is deployed and our phones are all able to utilize it, we're going to be in the 1 to 3 meter accurate realm, which is pretty incredible. That's like the width of your vehicle, pretty much, as opposed to maybe the length of your vehicle and your tow rig, if that's a good comparison, maybe. It's going to be a lot better. So our accuracy is going to go way up, and I would presume we're going to continue to utilize the old GPS constellation, GLONASS, cellular network if you got it, and GPS-3. So that's how we're going to get into that space of accuracy. So that should be pretty awesome. And it should be fully operational. From what I've read and what I've researched about it, it looks like 2023. So it's coming pretty quickly in the whole scheme of things. So that's exciting. That'll be neat to kind of watch as it goes. So you heard it here first if you hadn't heard of that before. But that's pretty cool. That'll be neat. That's the future. All right, Al, next slide. So this is, I get asked by customers and racers, I mean, all kinds of folks that come to us that expect us to have the answers, to come and ask us, what do I do? What do I buy? I need to get all set up and I want to go off-roading and I want to navigate well. So here's what I recommend. As I mentioned a minute ago when we were talking about screen size, that's the biggest thing. It doesn't matter Android or iOS, that's your personal preference. But buy for the screen size. If you want to have a dedicated device for this, you need to make sure that it's going to be big enough for you to be able to read while you're bouncing around in the woods, driving your vehicle. It's hard when things are bouncing. So a bigger screen's a bigger target. It's a lot easier to see. I also recommend, if you really want to get more accurate, the GPS Bluetooth devices. They help quite a bit, especially for a racer or somebody that's kind of moving at a quicker pace. So the two in the picture there that you see on the screen, the top one is called Dual, D-U-A-L, that's the brand. It's called a Dual GPS receiver. And then the bottom one is the Garmin brand. And they're basically little small units that you can mount outside of the vehicle, zip tie it to a roll cage or a bumper or maybe a roof rack or something like that. And it basically transmits the GPS location signal by Bluetooth into the cab with a Bluetooth signal to your device. And what it does, basically, if you think about it, if you've got your phone or your tablet or iPad or whatever mounted inside the vehicle, you're under a metal cab, and you may also be under a roll cage potentially, just depending on what you're driving. But all that is impeding your signal to be able to communicate with satellites. So being able to take one of these and plant it outside of the vehicle to get your signal eliminates that and helps refine your accuracy quite a bit. Sometimes there's quite a bit of lag and delay in the blue dot location on a digital device showing your location. And that's partly because of your signal, but it's also the GPS refresh rate is like 5 hertz and these are 10. So it's a lot faster refresh rate. So basically, in short, in non-nerd terms, the dot keeps up with you when you're moving. And it keeps you being a lot more accurate as far as navigation goes. Those are both rechargeable and pretty handy for that kind of thing. So But I've never had. I've used a Garmin Glow. That's the by the way, the Garmin model is called the Glow, GLO, and I've used that one personally at times in vehicles where I'm struggling a little bit with signal, and I've had them run for 2 days straight on a charge. So that's constant use through 2 days. So that's pretty impressive. I have no experience with a dual. Both of those are about $100, maybe 150, somewhere in that range, just depending on what retail is on them. But it's nice if you need to get a little bit better signal strength and a little bit more accuracy. And both of them, the other recommendation too, when you're buying from a mobile device, make sure you've got a good power supply. They make different amperage output USB chargers, and a lot of people don't know that. So you can modify what we would call a cigarette lighter type port or whatever to be a higher amp one that can handle a higher load for that higher USB amp charge, and that'll help keep you charged longer and faster. It charges the device faster. And then external batteries sometimes help too. So if you know you're going to be offline for a while, it's always good to have a backup plan if that's your only source of navigation, if you don't have any paper maps. So just make sure you got good power supply. And then those external receivers we just talked about. So, all right, Al, go ahead. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's get into some of these apps. I'm going to run down the list, and then we're going to go through the next slides. We'll kind of talk in detail about some of these. I heard Mike mention Avenza. That's the one that our company recommends people use, and it's the only option for them to utilize our maps. So it's basically a tool that our maps are downloaded into, and it stores the map inside the app, and it works out all the geographic wizardry on the back end and puts the magic blue dot on the map in an offline environment. So you don't have to have cell signal to do this. All of these, by the way, that's the case. The ones that I'm going to talk about here, that's imperative that you have an option to work offline. You need to be able to get maps and data downloaded prior to losing signal. So connect to Wi-Fi at home or at the office or wherever before you head out, and get all that downloaded first and stored locally on the device. And then you don't have to rely on cell signal to download from then on. And when you pan on a map, it's not pulling off of a tower. So anyway, that's the key on all of these, that's a capability of each one of them. So Avenza is a free app on the base level, and then you can pay to upgrade with some extra features built into that. Backcountry Navigator, Gaia, Mike's probably favorite, I would say, I bet. OnX Off-Road, Lifetime Trail Maps, Lead Nav, and then, like I mentioned, Cartatrax, our system utilizes the Avenza system. So, all right, Al, next one. And we'll start digging in. So Avenza is the one I'm probably most familiar with. It works in Google Play and iOS. Works offline, no cell signal required, like I mentioned. And also, as I mentioned before, you can download those U.S. Geologic Survey topo maps. They are available for free. If you go in the app, and when we do the show and tell time, I'll probably pull up this app and a couple more, and we can kind of look at some of the features on those in person. And we'll kind of talk through some of those in a little bit more detail if we need to. But you can, they have an in-app store where you can go and download maps and purchase them if they're for sale. There's individual private companies like Cartatrax kind of companies that sell maps inside that app store. And so you can download those. But the U.S. Geologic Survey ones are all free. You can even turn on a filter and say, show me the free ones only. And you can go and figure out where you're going and download those individually. So then there's also those in-app purchases as well. If you want to buy some that are sold by private cartographers, they're all over the world. There's people still making maps all over the place. Our family was out west last October, and we went and visited Zion National Park. It was near a place where we were wheeling at Sand Hollow, and we went and headed into Zion for a hike. And in Avenza, I was able to find an absolutely awesome National Geographic map that you can buy inside that app and download and use it in Avenza. And we used that to go hiking. And it was very awesome to have that right there in the palm of my hand. So nice and convenient. And then, of course, Cartatrax's maps, all of our maps work inside that app. And that's where they can be downloaded. So, all right, next one, Al. So Backcountry Navigator, this is an Android-only style app. It's probably pretty comparable to Gaia, which we'll talk about here next. Similar kind of base maps that you can load up, like topographic USGS maps, that kind of thing. Very useful on that standpoint. You can import external data, so you can bring in tracks, points, those kind of things that come from another source. Like if you've got a friend that's run something, says you need to go and run this route, here's my GPS tracks, you can get that from them and download it into this app on top of a base map and utilize it. So that's a handy one. We'll probably go into some more detail about this in a minute about crowdsourced data. Mike might have already talked about that a little bit. You need to be sure that you know your source and that you can trust that data as being accurate and legal. That's really important. So with each of these, there's kind of a bit of a disclaimer that I should not have to say on every one, but understand if you're using crowdsourced data or other data from someone that you may or may not know, just make sure you verify that and check it and make sure that you're going where you're supposed to be going. Backcountry Navigator is subscription based, so that's one of those. So next slide, Al. This is Gaia, and Mike, I know, knows about this. He probably knows about this a lot more than I do. I've got pretty limited experience inside Gaia. But they also, this is an iOS only. Mike, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they're still iOS only. But they've got some really, really good base map options. It's all subscription based, so it's kind of dependent on how far you want to buy into it, on what level you want to go to have access to different base maps and other data that's brought in and crowdsourced data that you can access there. But you can also bring in that data and layer it on top, and it's a pretty robust app. I mean, my experience that I've got in it is very, very useful. It's just the nature of what I do. I'm kind of a little different. I'm kind of over the top with navigation and do my own, so it's kind of a different realm. So, but Mike's definitely the guy that can probably talk you through a lot of that. There's a lot of available options out there, like in YouTube. You can watch a lot of videos that can talk you through it. It's so capable. It's kind of, I compare it to like Photoshop versus Paint. Gaia is kind of like Photoshop. The sky's the limit on the capability inside this app, but you just need to spend a lot of time in it to start to get comfortable with it and understand all of its features and how to manipulate data in it. You'll get better at it as you spend more time with it, like anything. But that one's one that it takes a little bit of time to really get a full grasp of its full capability, like Photoshop. If you've played in Photoshop, you know it's incredible what it can do, but gosh, it's difficult to get started sometimes, so it's a little overwhelming. And again, that's a subscription-based option. So this is kind of an up-and-coming app. They came from another app and a parent company called Onyx Hunt, and it was and it's a huge app, and it's very useful for hunters. The big value there is property data for hunters. If you shoot a deer and it runs off property, you can go and figure out whose property it's run onto and contact the owner, that kind of thing. It is Android and iOS based. There's a lot of pretty good base map options that you can toggle through, from satellite imagery, which frankly isn't really that useful in the eastern United States because you're just looking at treetops. But out west in the desert, it's very useful. So that's nice. You can toggle through that. There's topographic contour lines that you can load up in there as well. You can import external data, that kind of thing. But most of the data that you're going to find in there is all crowdsourced, and I'll have some screenshots here in a minute. I'm going to kind of show you all an example of the difference between what that crowdsourced data looks like and other sources. But again, just crowdsourced data, so you kind of have to take it all with a grain of salt and decide if you want to utilize that or not, and make sure you vet it first. That's pretty much it on Onyx Off-Road. It's just another one to mention. Next slide, Al. Okay, so here's another one. This is a little bit of a different business model. Lifetime Trail Maps. They are Android only. It's a package subscription option. The hardware is basically a Samsung tablet that you buy from the company. So you get this thing pretty much preloaded with all this data. I think you might be able to buy your own tablet and then ship it to them or something. I'm not really sure how that works exactly, but It's like a preloaded Samsung tablet, basically. You can do some pre-route planning and kind of figure out what route you want to run through a certain area based inside this app. There's monthly or annual updates. You can choose options there as far as how you want to get those updates. The data that's in it is predominantly crowdsourced, and then they've got a little bit of proprietary data that was collected by the company and the guy that runs it. They tout a very large number of 100,000 miles of trail data. But again, a lot of that's crowdsourced, and you need to be real cautious when you're following that kind of data, just because you don't know the rider and how it was collected, if it was done legally or not. So there's just a lot of risk in that kind of thing. And I can't emphasize that enough. This app, by the way, is very popular with side-by-side riders. So there's a lot of trails in Northeast Tennessee and into Kentucky and West Virginia, just miles and miles of routes that folks can run. There's some connections between different parks and public and private lands. And they've become extremely popular with side-by-sides. You can go a long way on those things on pretty limited fuel. They've got a pretty good miles per gallon and capability. So, and you can move pretty comfortably in them. So they're very popular. And so this system is one that's become pretty popular with that crowd. But worth mentioning, and just kind of a different way and a different approach of selling maps and off-road navigation. All right, Al, next one. All right, LeadNav is an app that is mostly used in off-road racing. They're very common out west, and they use them a lot in off-roading or off-road racing. A lot of the features inside this app are catered to racers. They've got some options. For instance, you can identify hazards in a race course, like when you're pre-running a race course, you can say giant cactus on the right or whatever and mark that position. And I believe it'll actually play that back for you. So you can do an audio recording even. And as you approach it in a race, it'll actually call your own voice out and say, look out, big cactus on the right, or whatever the hazard is, or details as to how to run your race course. So it's catered towards a racer pretty much. But the imagery options are really useful. So if you're doing a lot of riding out west or trying to plan routes out west, imagery can be handy at times. So that's an option. It's a package subscription type thing. Depending on how far you want to get involved into it, it can get pretty expensive. But remember, with each of these different tiers of subscription, a lot of that's buying you more capability from a racer standpoint. So this app's probably not the best for a weekend wheeler kind of adventurer. But if you want to get into racing, that's probably a great app for you. That's a bit of a typo. This hardware loaded Samsung tablet, that's incorrect. This is Apple only, so that disregard that note. The next one, though, the pre-trip route planning, you can do a lot inside this app, kind of like the last one that we just talked about, the lifetime trail maps. You can do pre-trip route planning and kind of stitch together a route that you want to go and explore. So that's kind of a useful thing built into that app. And then the crowdsourced data and race courses are pretty much all you got when you get in there. There's no preloaded data. You've got to bring it in from outside sources and crowdsource that information. So, and again, it's very race focused, like I mentioned. All right, next one, Al. Oh boy. So I can talk at length about this one. I'll keep it real limited, but this is my company that my wife and I run. As I mentioned, these maps that we make, they are loaded into Avenza Maps. So that app's available in Android and Apple. Work offline without signal. So the way that we sell maps is we're actually selling maps. Unlike a lot of the ones that I just mentioned, those are all apps that have a means to manage data. So the points, lines, and areas that you download in different file formats like a GPX or a KML type file can be downloaded, and that's all data. We actually make a map that is essentially like a PDF file that knows its place in space. So it has coordinates built into it. And this app, Avenza, sorts all that out for you. So with a map, you actually have the ability with the cartography that we do to add in all kinds of symbology and text, a lot of other features that is really hard to show in data. So you're just going to have a line, and a lot of times the app doesn't know at what zoom level to start displaying the text to name that route and that line, or a point feature. At what point do you start putting text on it when you zoom in? They all kind of struggle with that. With our maps, we design them to where that's visible as you zoom in. It pops up and is visible, becomes visible once you zoom in to a certain level, and it's appropriate. So with our background, we kind of judge on our own to determine at what point does that need to be visible. So what scale, what size that font needs to be able to read it, what colors are appropriate to identify different rated trails and that kind of thing. So all of our maps are sold through our website. You got subscriptions to individual maps. Some of them are even bundles. If you're going to go to an area where we have multiple maps, you can buy the whole bundle and have everything you need for that area. And they're 1-year subscription or annually renewing subscription. So depending on which you want to go, if you go to an off-road park really often and you go there all the time, it's probably good to buy that annually renewing one because you'll just always have the latest map. We notify everybody by email when we put out a new map or a new file of a new map or a new park or an update to a map or whatever. So if you buy it, you'll get an email from us if we update it, basically. So you're notified. It's kind of nice to have that capability. And then the weird thing about us is we don't use crowdsourced data. We collect all the data ourselves. So I'm physically going down these tracks and these routes and going through these off-road parks and that kind of thing, and I am collecting the data with a high-end survey-grade, sub-meter accurate GPS unit. And I'm taking the time to stop at every intersection and name the trail, and I'm usually going through it with a park owner or locals that know the names of these obstacles, and I'm naming the obstacles as we go and dropping points. And then I take that data, bring it home, clean it up a little bit, and hand it off to my wife, who then in turn turns it into a pretty map, and then we put them on our website. So that's how that works. But you get the ratings in those parks, and you can, if you're a novice off-roader and you haven't been through all of Mike's classes yet and been trained how to drive properly, then this is a good start because you can go and look and real quickly determine what the ratings of these trails are based on our color coding of those trails and determine which ones you can go and explore and be safe in and not get yourself into trouble and drive off a cliff or something with some kind of crazy extreme obstacle that you don't have any business on. So that's really nice. It's something that you don't find in the crowdsourced data apps that's really unique that we do, and it's an imperative thing for a novice wheeler that hasn't really got a lot of experience yet in off-roading. So that's a handy thing. So next slide, Al. That's enough of Cartotracks for the moment. So our data sources, where things come from, we talked a little bit at the very beginning about the USGS topo maps, Forest Service, USDA.gov, and BLM.gov. That's Bureau of Land Management again. That an acronym is used elsewhere these days, but this is the Bureau of Land Management that we're talking about. They manage a lot of land out west for us. So you can get data from them. The apps are all utilizing, most of these apps are utilizing crowdsourced data, and we'll talk about what those, I'll show those examples of some screenshots here in a minute, and we'll do that again in the show and tell session coming up. But so some of the sources down here, this third bullet point is pretty handy. If you want to go and try and find some of these routes that you can download into these apps, traildamage.com is a website, jeeptheusa.com is one, and FunTreks, y'all remember I mentioned earlier those print books, the guidebooks that were around Moab and Desert Southwest. FunTreks is that company I couldn't think of. Mark Wells is the guy's name. They've got some data that I think you can download as well. So you can download those from their sites and then go and import them into Gaia, Backcountry Navigator, OnX, and those kind of options. So that's handy. You can go and a lot of those on those sites, I would trust a lot more than just random crowdsourced data uploaded into an app. Those are, I would presume, probably a little bit more vetted and trusted if these folks are standing behind it and publishing that data like that. So those are good sources if you want to jot those down. Those are handy, good places to go and scout out. And then, of course, Google is an option. There's private user groups with KML data. There's a couple of Facebook groups where there's some GPS data that you can join and access those. So those are handy. And then Cartotrax is an option. Again, we make maps, but I'm not quite at liberty to go into much detail about this yet. But there will be some options in the near future for Cartotrax to be available in some other, at least one other option right now coming up. Can't talk about it yet, but that'll be an option. So there may be an option to access our data actually and navigate with that. So, and that'll be a good source once it comes online. So I might be able to talk about it by our next meeting. I'm not sure yet, but anywho. All right, Al, on to the next. Okay, so we've talked about crowdsourced a lot. Y'all have heard me talk about this a lot. There's some risks, and crowdsourced data has a lot of risk, and it's something that I like to teach people about. And it's not come to Cartotrax and do nothing else. There's value in crowdsourced data, and I get that. But I like to just try and showcase that there are risks here. The spatial accuracy isn't always great. Realize, as I just described, we're collecting our data with a really high-end, I mean, it's like a $6,000 unit that we utilize when we're collecting data. Most of the crowdsourced data is coming from folks using a smartphone. And as you recall, our data accuracy right now with our GPS constellations is like 10 to 15 meter, somewhere in that neighborhood. And with that comes really jagged lines, and you get a lot of just garbled data, so it's really difficult to try and follow it sometimes, and especially if you're in an off-road park where there's a network of trails, it's really hard because they start to kind of crisscross on top of one another, and it's hard to really separate those and read it. So spatial accuracy is difficult. The legality of it is kind of risky. You could have a rider that's collecting data and uploading it to an app that may have inadvertently driven across private property without permission and then uploaded that data to one of these apps. So you're kind of promoting a trespass situation. And I think that's going to become a bit more of a problem as we go forward in the future with these kind of situations. So just be really careful about where you get that data from, and make sure that you know that it's legal where you're going to go ride. The rating risks, if you can't find ratings in crowdsourced data, that can be really tricky. I'm not saying that I'm the only one that knows how to rate a trail. There's other people that understand that. But there's also some confusion as far as, or not confusion, but there's no standard, I will say, in rating trails in the eastern United States that seems to be accepted. Out west, they have a 1 to 10 scale that's becoming more and more accepted. And I think that helps, but it's also kind of confusing because it's hard to tell what's the difference between a 5 and a 6. Personally, I think about 5 or 6 total range of ratings is about where you need to be. But it's all over the place. There's no standard really completely agreed upon. So when you get crowdsourced data, who knows what the rating really is and how difficult that is. So it's a tricky one. Some other risks, changes. Trails are constantly changing. Land ownership is changing. Access to public lands is changing. Unfortunately, it's more getting closed than it is getting open these days, but there's some risk there. So the systems that are available out there, these apps that showcase crowdsourced data, are probably not going around and checking each of these every year and making sure these are still accessible, or that the trails have changed or whatever. So having a relationship with the park owners like we do helps a lot. Park owners give me a call all the time and say, we've changed these many trails through the winter, come back out, let's do some re-updates and recollection of data to update the map. So you're not getting that quite as often with the crowdsourced app, so there's some risk there with those changes. And then the last one is becoming more of a problem for private map companies with copyright infringement. And y'all may remember the big debacle with that music source called Napster. This is kind of similar on a map level where people can, these two apps are two in particular that we know of called Maplets and Maprica, that are apps that are available in app stores. They kind of come and go. They've been challenged by companies for copyright infringement, ourselves included. There's been some others that have gone after them, and so they'll disappear from the Apple Store and then they'll pop back up, or the Google Play Store and they'll pop back up. But basically, somebody can take a picture of a paper map that's copyrighted and upload it into this app, and then people can download it at no charge. So pretty much ripping off the little private map companies, which is really not fair. So it's kind of like Napster. Call it Mapster if you want. But I'm not a fan of them unless, of course, they're getting permission from a company to upload those maps. But no permission from us on these. So, and there's other companies that have struggled with this. So not a good source. So, all right, Al, next. Okay, so here's the screenshots I was mentioning. If you look on we'll start out on the right, actually. So this is a screenshot of Onyx and what you can find inside Onyx. So where we're looking, this is actually a park in southwest Missouri, just southeast of Springfield, called SMORE, Southern Missouri Off-Road Ranch. It's a really good park. It's probably one of the best laid out parks I've ever been in the country. They've got actual street signs at intersections, that kind of thing. So on the right is what you'll find if you download the Onyx app and you subscribe to their service. That's what you're going to find in SMORE of that park. The same kind of area as what you see on the left, which is a Cartotrax map. So you can probably see the difference. I didn't zoom way in. I kind of wanted to just show it at that scale. So you can kind of see the zoom level of what you find in each. But if you were to zoom in on the left of the Cartotrax, if you were to zoom in, you're going to get to a level where you're going to read text and you're going to see the names of the trail. Each trail has a number rating on the back end that's kind of coded with the legend, so you can derive what the rating is. It's also color coded by rating. The data is just really accurate and clean and smooth. And then over on the right, this is kind of like a pile of spaghetti noodles, pretty much. It's really hard to determine what trail's what. They've got some names that pop up on some. They don't pop up on others. They're all the same symbology. There's a white center and then a green border, but there's no ratings to them. So it's really hard to determine if you're trying to drive through this park in a Jeep or a Toyota or whatever. It's hard to know where you need to be going if you want to navigate that. So that's kind of an example and probably a pretty stark difference between the two, and y'all can see what you get. So it's kind of a pile of spaghetti noodles a lot of time, but that's what it is. So, but there's places where that sometimes can be useful. I mean, if that's all you got, that's all you got, and you can roll with it. But that's what you have. So if you were to zoom in really tight on that Onyx image, there's tree canopy all throughout that park, and a lot of times the imagery you get is actually summer imagery. You can see the green fields up there at the top of the screen. The screenshot. It's summer months probably, and when you zoom in, you can't see a trail through that tree canopy at all. That's why we don't use imagery at all in ours, and it also helps keep the file size down. If you add in imagery, it starts getting really big. So if you want to cache that and be able to work offline, it takes up a lot of memory on your device when you have imagery in there. So unless you're out west, it's really not that useful in the eastern United States to have imagery. Looks cool. I love looking at imagery, but you just can't see trails underneath it because you're looking at leaves. All right, so next slide, Al. Okay, this is kind of a good thing here. That's a federal government bill called the Mapland Act. It was introduced last year, both chambers of Congress. It was a bipartisan bill. I checked the status today before we did this class tonight. It hasn't moved forward since the introduction, but it's still going through process. So there's hope that this might happen. But what it does, it moves public land boundary information into the 21st century and makes it all digital. So that means a lot of these apps will have access to this in a digital form, and you can get the public land boundaries to download those inside those apps, which really changes the game quite a bit. because a lot of the stuff out west, with the exception of the Onyx Hunt app, which is more for hunting, it's hard to go and get land boundary. And so you don't want to go off onto somebody's private property without permission. But if it's public land, being able to see those boundaries and to stay within bounds is going to be really helpful. So this is exciting. I hope that this happens. So all those property boundaries that are managed by BLM, Bureau of Land Management, Forest Service, etc., are going to become more readily available in that digital form. So it's all switching more to digital now, which definitely has a lot of value across the board to be able to zoom in and out. A lot of things you just can't do with a paper map. So anywho, so that's good. Hopefully this goes through and is passed, and that'll really accelerate that process of getting it all digital. All right, Al, next one. We're getting close to the end of the slideshow at least. So these are some of the mounting options that are available. This is also a big question people ask me. How do you mount it? I think it's really important that you do mount a device. Don't sit there and hold it in your cup holder or in your lap or something. You need to get it mounted. I prefer the closer to the windshield screen, the better, but not blocking your view. But if you're trying to navigate and drive, the less distance you're moving your eyes from your field of view where you need to be looking in that screen, the closer to those two the better, especially navigating in a park. I don't recommend it driving down the highway. Nobody should, but in a trail situation, going slow, trying to navigate in a park, definitely you need to get it mounted. The temporary mounting solutions, suction cups work. I think, everything in this picture is a company called RAM, RAM. They make all these different types of mounts for phones. The one in the left that looks kind of like a spider with the 4 legs, you squeeze the 2 on the side and they kind of spread apart, and you drop your phone in there and let go, and it spring loads and locks it back on the phone, and it's super solid. I've got some friends that have rolled Jeeps over, and those things are the phone's still mounted in it. So they're solid. The suction cups hold well. Roll cage mounts, there's a whole bunch of options that RAM makes. There's a company called Carolina Metal Masters, CMM, and they make some grab bars like in a JK in the front of the passenger seat, in front of the glove box, there's a little grab bar. They make a replacement that has little balls that the RAM mounts will attach to. So that's a handy solution, especially for something bigger like a tablet or an iPad. It's pretty solid. A lot of custom options. Some of the off-road racers out west that build custom race rigs and big tube buggies that we see in the eastern United States, they'll hard mount tablets and iPads and that kind of thing into the dash with a custom mount. So that's an option too if you're going that route. Crawl Tunes is a company that does speaker cans for Jeeps and that kind of thing. They carry the RAM mount, so they're a good option. If you just Google Crawl Tunes, it's all one word, you'll find them. Derek is a friend of ours. He's out of Texas. And he can fix you up with different types of mounts. He's got access to all of those. That's a good one. Lead Nav, they sell some mounts. That's one of those apps that we talked about earlier, the racer-friendly one. But they also sell those little dual GPS units and a mount for the GPS unit too. So that's an option. And then, of course, Lifetime Trail Maps, they're the ones that are selling those tablets. They sell mounts for the tablet as well as kind of a kit thing. So talk to them if you're interested in that. They've got some options and mounting options there. Personally, I like the suction cup mount because I can move it from vehicle to vehicle. If I've got to go from one vehicle to the next, I can just undo the suction cup and go stick it in another one. But the bottom, Al, if you want to hover your cursor over that little middle bar in the middle of that RAM mount there in the middle, you see the little knob in the middle? Yes, right there, right in the middle of the center arm, that right there. Yep. So you loosen that and it separates the 2 little center pieces that clamp down on the ball on either end. So when you loosen that, you can pivot it around and orient it however you want. The ball is rubberized, so it holds solid. And they're very, very good design. They're made in the U.S., by the way. Also, I think out in Oregon, I believe. And they're lifetime warranty. So a lot of value. That's my favorite. I think I push most people to RAM. You pay a little bit more, but American made and lifetime warranty, it's hard to beat that. They work really well. So that's what I recommend on mounts. And that's pretty much what I got for this presentation. We can go through questions. Mike, if you've got a question format, you might have to point to somebody and have them speak into a mic in person. And we can manage that. If y'all want to ask me anything, if I don't know the answer, I'll make it up.
All right, can you hear me, Jake?
I can.
Awesome. So yeah, great presentation. We'll see if we have any questions online first. Al, do we have any questions?
Well, if anyone has a question, just unmute and blurt it out.
Looks good.
Come on, Cynthia. I know you have a question.
All right, we did. I think we had a question here in the crowd.
Yeah, go ahead.
What?
On your Pacific maps that you design, does it pull out like the Anasazi ruins?
So good question, and this is a question not specifically about those ruins, but we get these kind of questions a lot. What we do is map specific areas. So the map that we are going to make for an off-road park is only going to show that area. So we'll have the boundary of the property boundary and all the trails within.
Okay.
And that's like a park situation in the eastern United States. Out west, trails tend to be a lot more linear and long distance and that kind of thing. So the maps take on a whole different shape. If there's anything that's within the margins of that map that are interesting, place names and other features, we'll of course put those in there. But we don't map like the whole US. We kind of map specific areas, and we're very off-road specific. So most of our maps are off-roading type maps and routes that you would run in an off-road vehicle. That kind of thing. But so the ruins, of course, you can navigate to the Anasazi ruins with Google Maps. But the Avenza Maps app, like you remember I mentioned earlier about going and hiking in Zion National Park, Avenza has that in-app store, and you can find maps of specific areas like that. A lot of the ones in the National Park Service, you can find really good maps from National Geographic and some other sources that are within that app. So I'm sure you could find a map of that. You just open the little store inside the Avenza Maps app, and you can search by area, and you'll start dropping little pins that represent all the different maps in that region. So if you want to go zoom into that area, as you zoom in, you'll start to see the little pins popping up. Just tap a pin, and it'll identify what the map is, what it covers, and that kind of thing. And there's a search feature in there too, so you can type in Anasazi ruins, and it'll populate it with a list of all the maps that they have that cover that area. So that help?
Yes, that did. Thanks. That's really cool. It's really unique.
Awesome. Anybody else?
So I'm just starting out. I haven't even been on anything yet. But how do you find out like if the trail you're on is legal? I mean, I hear a lot about do your homework and all that stuff, but
so there are resources out there, specifically like what I mentioned earlier, a motor vehicle use map if it's say Forest Service. What I do typically is, let's say I'm on Gaia or like on X, and I identify a route, and I'm like, hey, this looks cool. Once I identify that route, what it is, like Jake said, I find the name of it, then I will go, let's say it's in Pisgah National Forest, then I will go to their website and look at their most current motor vehicle use map, which they'll have available for free there, and I will cross-reference it with that to make sure that I'm on a legal route. And a lot of times in those maps, like if you click on the trail, it will tell you the dates that it's open. For instance, here in Pisgah National Forest, we have some of them, they're open year round. So it'll say, 12/31 through whatever, the dates, but others don't open until April. They close down the end of December, and they don't open until like April 21st. And so it'll notate that like on the motor vehicle use map and stuff like that.
Okay.
And unfortunately, to a certain extent, sometimes it is it is a little bit of luck of the draw. Sometimes you are just going to show up at a trail and they're going to have a gate up, right? So, typically if you come across, you laid out a route and you double checked it, it said it was a legal route. Sometimes in bad weather, like here in the snow, they'll close a gate and they'll lock it. So if you come up to a locked gate, it's not a good trail. That's one of the things that I like about the National Geographic Trails maps is they show you where all the gates are on the property. So just in their map legends, it looks almost like the old-timey cartoon barbells that Popeye would use. But it'll show it there, so you know when you get up to it, hey, I'm in this area that has a gate, so if it's closed, I can't go any further.
And directions. When some has directions,
Yep.
to stay.
Yeah. So that's the best way that I found. Jake may have some other info.
Yeah, Mike, I think the cliff notes on what you said is what I would say is go to the source and go to the property owner. So go and figure out whose land this is on and who manages that land, and then go to that source. Go to their website like you were talking and look at the motor vehicle use map for Pisgah, or if it's a national forest, or if it's private land, a private park, go to that source of that website for that entity and start there. But it all comes down to land ownership and land management, who's managing that route and that land. And that should be the governing body that decides if it's open or not, if it's legal or not. So go to the source.
What I will typically do a lot of times, one of the good things that I do like about Gaia and some of the mobile units is they will have a map layer that notates public lands versus private lands. It'll be shaded where public lands will be green, private lands will be white, and even there again too, it'll show property lines. Sometimes I know with Gaia you can get a layer that shows property lines, and that's a lot of times, especially out west, where you are covering great distances on BLM land, and you may have this little splotch of land that's private in the middle that you go to drive through. So a lot of times that's what I'll cross-reference too. Once I've laid out a route that I know I'm going to cover, then I'll throw in another base layer map, which we'll kind of learn a little bit about this in the next class, but throw in a base layer that shows me private versus public lands. So I can tell if I am crossing private lands, it'll show me. Because really hitting on what Jake said about crowdsourced data. So here we used to have a trail called Richland Road. And Richland Road was basically it was a state road or a county road that was fun to wheel, right? Because it was all gravel. It had bridges, but you could also drive right next to the bridge and do the water crossing, and they had some obstacles and stuff there. Well, due to crowdsourced data from some of these other apps on the phone, people were sharing with each other. Either side of the road was private lands, but there's this cool obstacle over there, and this guy decides, whoever it was, decides to go up and play on that cool set of rock feature over there, and then he comes back down. Well, his GPS coordinates mark that out. And then he shares that with his buddy, so his buddy does the same thing, and the next guy does the same thing, and the next guy, until eventually the property owners were like, you know what, we're done. We want this stopped, and they close the trail down. And this is very common in especially on the East Coast, right? That type of things we find, especially not even with just the guy drove off trail, but like Jake was saying, the accuracy with which we have. So sometimes I know with Gaia, probably can't really see it that well, but when you pull Gaia up on your phone, you can actually look at how accurate it is. So standing in here right now, I don't know if you guys can see that there on the screen. Well, it's all white, but right here, when you open it up, right now I'm plus or minus 100 feet.
That's huge.
That is huge. Now, obviously, we're in a metal building, but
Still.
in canopy cover, if I'm tracking my route here, it could be tracking it 100 feet off the trail, and now I share that route with someone, and they're going to think that the trail. I like to say common sense. The trail's not in the woods, but very easily it could be, right? So that's where the crowdsourced data is so important, and that's why a lot of cross-reference of checking public versus private lands, and looking, if I can get good satellite imagery to see a trail, um, kind of as far as where it goes on that property. And I will check several maps. So even though I may use a motor vehicle use map in Gaia, I'll go to the next layer, which is a National Geographic's map, and then I'll check it with what trails are on the Garmin Overlander and see how close these match, and make sure that they're at least somewhere in that general vicinity.
I had another question for Jake, real quick. You're talking about the satellites, the GPS and the GPS-3s? Are you going to be, or not you, but the powers that be, going to be tapping into Elon Musk and the SpaceX and the satellites he's putting up?
I don't. That's a good question. I don't know if his launches are part of that constellation. I need to go and look that up. I'm not really sure. It's entirely possible, and I kind of want to say that he is. I think it is connected somehow, but I don't really know.
Yeah, his cars back and forth, and different things.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Just to kind of talk about the mounts that Jake was talking about earlier. So this is basically the mount, a RAM mount. This comes with the Garmin Overlander. So this is just a magnetic one. It is powered. You put a plug in the side, so every time you clip it on, it's powered. But this is the type of mount he was talking about. This is the RAM mount suction cup. It's a strong suction cup. It holds on the window very well. Once you clip it in place, it does have the middle portion here, so you can articulate this pretty much in any direction based on the length of it, and then you just tighten it back down again. So these, there's tons of options. Like Jake pointed out, for those of us that drive Toyotas, Expedition Essentials makes a lot of mounts for our Toyotas. 4Runners, where this mounts, basically it's got a RAM mount right above the radio that bolts into place. So there are solutions out there for phones and tablets and stuff like this as well. I'm very similar to Jake in that I prefer the RAM style mounts because it holds whatever it is. Even if it's your phone's going to move around a little bit, or a tablet's going to move around a little bit, but a RAM mount's going to hold it the best, versus, just buying anything off of, like, say, Amazon.
Is that the one he said he's seeing roll over?
Yeah, it'll still hold it. Yep.
There.
Yeah, and again, so this is quite a bit heavier than a phone, but we've recently been kind of running around on a piece of property, and that we're putting trails on. So we're actually running in new trails, but it'll hold this on there, and I've never had an issue with it falling off. So the RAM mounts definitely are the way to go. This end like this is kind of proprietary to the Garmin, but they do have some great options for holding tablets in, very secure. If you don't like it on your windshield, they do make one that will bolt to the mount to your passenger seat, and it comes up and it kind of has your tablet lower down, kind of out of your field of view. Downside to that is you're having to look down to see it. But
Could you telescope it
up? A little bit, but it doesn't come up quite as high.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not like cop cars or such.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of those are like RAM style mounts.
Okay.
That the police officers use.
Hey, Mike.
Yeah.
I'm going to interject there. One thing I'll add on the suction cup mount, if you're going to mount it up on the windshield, and a lot of vehicles have a deeper dash than I'm used to. I'm in a Jeep CJ, so my windshield's almost flat, and I don't have much of a dash, so I'm clamped down to a roll cage that I have. But other vehicles where you got a little bit deeper dash, where you've got like a padded dash and the windshield's a little bit further forward, I'll attach that suction cup to the windshield, obviously, but rest the unit on that dash. And you kind of have a dual position mount. So you got the suction cup holding on one end, and then the unit itself just rests gently on the dash, and it never moves. I mean, it just gives it a little additional support when you're bouncing around. Just let it rest gently on the dash and you're set. That helps a lot if you've got a deeper dash, and you can do that. If you're in a Jeep Wrangler or something, there's not much of a dash really that you can do that with. But Toyota 4Runner or something like that, you've got a dash with some depth to it. So that's a good option and a good practice.
Yeah, I did have a question for Jake. You've got a pretty cool CJ Scrambler, but when you're traveling, where do you store your Scottle?
I usually just have my friend Mike bring it.
All right.
Hey, Mike, I have the next one in 2 weeks is live.
Okay, awesome. All right, so if we don't have any more questions, I know we're kind of running out of time here, but certainly want to thank Jake for giving us his time tonight. And keep your eyes open. Go to their website. Check out cartotracks.com. He's constantly updating new maps. It is a lot of off-road parks. His maps are super detailed. They are great maps. I used to use his when I guided through Uwharrie National Forest all the time. And I still use them when it's an area I'm in that it does have mapping on. So definitely huge thanks to Jake. I also want to thank Southern 4-Wheel Drive and Al here for supporting this.
Yeah.
This is our first actual Zoom class and Southern 4-Wheel Drive Association. If you don't know about Southern 4-Wheel Drive, so they are a nonprofit organization that fights basically to keep our public lands open. So their mission statement is education, conservation, and recreation. Al and I are co-coordinators for education. So we do a lot of classes and we do a TechNet online every. People can see. Yeah, come on up, Al. You can tell them about the TechNet.
So they can see them.
No,
So they can see them.
I didn't have to do anything tonight.
Now you got to.
I'll just stand here while you talk.
All right. So we do a TechNet together. We try to do them every other Thursday night.
Correct.
Through Southern 4-Wheel Drive, through their Facebook page. It's always new information. The really cool thing about the TechNets is that if you watch it live, when we do it on Facebook Live, and you follow the instructions, if you comment the comment of the week that we tell you, you are entered for a chance to win 5 BF Goodrich tires up to 37 inches in diameter, KM3s or KO2s. So it's a great chance to win a set of tires. Huge thanks to BFG for supporting that.
That's not every week. That's over the summer we'll be doing that, and then we'll do the drawing at some.
There's one set of tires, but you can watch every TechNet live, and every time that you watch it and comment correctly, then it does enter you for another chance. So if you watch them all, it may be what, like 14?
Yeah.
And you have one tomorrow night.
Yeah, there's one tomorrow night on spotting. But Southern 4-Wheel Drive does a ton of really great work as far as keeping our public lands here in the Southeast open. So Uwharrie National Forest, Daniel Boone Backcountry Byway, just to name a few. But they have a great grant program, and it does a lot to help us out. Now, you've been with Southern 4-Wheel Drive for
only 5 years.
5 years, yeah. So, and they've been around for,
oh my gosh, 20.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. So
there's a brochure that the folks that are in the room got a little brochure that talks about Southern. We'd love for you guys to join it. It only costs $10.
Oh, that's
and all that money is plowed back in to our efforts to keep our trails open. So
yeah.
And you have 2 big events a year, right?
We have 2 big events each year. We have Trail Fest, which is coming up April the 30th and May the 1st and 2nd. That's at Adventure Off-Road Park in Pittsburgh, Tennessee, I think.
Oh, wow, okay.
And it's a great park. Mike's going to be there doing some training. I'll be there. We'll just have a good time. And then we have another one in the fall called Dixie Run. It'll be at Windrock. Some of you's probably familiar with Windrock. I know it actually will be outfitters do some of their rides there. So we're looking forward to it. It'll be in October.
Yeah.
Exciting.
Yeah. And so huge raffles at their events. Lots of really cool things. Winches from Warren, tires from BFG, all kinds of stuff. So they're really cool events. We do training there. We do guided trail rides there as well through Morrison's Outdoor Adventures in conjunction with Southern 4-Wheel Drive Association. So huge thanks for them kind of supporting us to help us get this stuff online for everyone. That's a huge help. So thank you, John.
Yeah, thank you.
And we love feedback from the people that are watching online. Send Sarah an email and give us some feedback on how we can improve. Okay.
Yeah.
Mom's gonna be so happy.
So thank you guys a ton for those of you that are online for tuning in. Sarah has gone live with the next class, and again, in the next class, we're going to have Jake here. We're going to get in depth.
Is Jake going to be personally here?
We're hoping.
Okay.
Cross our fingers that he'll be here.
Is he still on
I think he's still on there.
Yeah, I'm here.
But
there? He's gonna
hey.
sleep on our table bed.
yeah, he's gonna sleep on our table
I'll
bed
sleep on the table.
in the camper. But we're gonna get into how we at Morrison's Outdoor Adventures actually go about kind of mapping out our trail rides. So it's where today you've learned about the options that are out there. The next class is going to be primarily about how do we use these options to map out a good trail ride. And then Jay's going to help us learn about identifying different terrain types through like topo maps, contour lines, things like that. So it'll be good to kind of have him on board to do that. But again, thank you guys a ton. And if you do have any questions or feedback, please send Sarah or myself an email. Send us a message on Facebook, whatever. Reach out, however works best. All right. Thank you guys a ton.
Thank you.
Thank you.